Hi everyone. We're on the home stretch. Is it too loud? Is that too loud? How about the glare? Too much glare off my head? Well, thank you everyone. Thank you, Brand Innovators, for providing us this platform to have this conversation. Thank you, GroupM, for hosting this amazing event. I started my career at a GroupM agency, Ogilvy One, as an interactive coordinator. I actually saw my first boss earlier today, Jonathan Adams, which every time I see him, it just is so comforting. It's my first boss. So happy to be here, happy to have this conversation with Jenn from Bank of America, Head of Content Marketing. Jenn, I'll allow you to introduce yourself and explain a little bit about your role.
Hi everybody. I know it's late in the day. Hopefully you're all eating cookies and caffeine and staying energized to talk about content marketing. And I know a lot of this audience is folks who are more squarely focused on media, but content is one of the most important things that you can put media behind, in my totally biased opinion, so thank you for being here. So I lead content marketing for Bank of America, and what that means is I'm sort of focused across 5 of our core lines of business. So I do content for a lot of different things and topics, one of which is Merrill Lynch, in addition to the Bank of America brand. And some of it is consumer, some is B2B, some is for advisors. So I get to wear a lot of different hats, which is a really fun job. So
excellent. And again, I'm James Kiernan from Penske Media, VP of Agency Development. And Penske Media represents a long portfolio of brands, ranging from entertainment brands like Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, music brands, Billboard, Rolling Stone. We've also invested quite a bit in the events business. There's an events music festival called Life is Beautiful in Vegas that we hosted this past summer. We also acquired Dick Clark Productions, who gives us access to amazing events like the Golden Globes, which is coming up. Happy to see that Hollywood's back open. Super exciting, super important to our business. But overall, we represent 31 brands, and certainly content matters to us as well. One thing we won't be talking about is cookieless or loss of signals, but one could argue that it's a time that content's going to matter most, like reaching consumers in a contextually relevant environment, or at events, and using events to kind of distribute content across like digital touch points. So again, super excited to have this conversation about content marketing. I recall when I was at Twitter, we would often try to navigate content marketing groups or agencies. And it was quite difficult, quite frankly, because different teams define it in different ways. And it's also constantly evolving over the last 10, 20 years. So perhaps you can maybe speak to like what you've seen, how you've seen content marketing evolve over the last several years.
Content is everything. In the very early days of content marketing, I think it was very sort of salesy, like, 100 years ago, Jell-O was doing very branded recipe books, and then, many years into the journey, it sort of became as though brands were allergic to selling their own products and services via content, and this very, like, separation between church and state, and, content had to be editorial, which meant not connected with brands and products. And I actually feel like we've started to shift away from that a little bit, and now we're in this area where actually audiences expect you to create content that ties to who you are as a brand. It just needs to be good. And I think that audience-driven content has totally changed, and people are expecting totally different things. No longer can you just have an 800-word article and call it a day. What's happening in social and other places is just driving total game changes in terms of what types of things people expect to consume. And there's so many more places and ways to slice and dice and create content, and the expectations are just higher, I think, from audiences, and you can't kind of get away with like the same old tricks. And I think, we all probably remember the social like war room days where everyone said, let's have a war room and get your agency involved, and you all sat in a room together during a couple of key tent poles. I think editorial content sort of was doing the same thing. And now I think people are beyond that to a certain extent, and like expecting things that are really going to add value to them immediately and upfront. And it's okay if it's tied to your brand, but it just needs to be valuable to them.
Yeah, I think back to some of those war rooms, like whether it be the Super Bowl, the Oscars.
Gotta have one for the Super Bowl.
Everyone wanted to be there. Like, everyone wanted to be part of it, like looking over the shoulder, people who were like on social platforms.
That was Oreo's fault for their
I guess
viral
so. I guess so. But what are some of like the emerging trends that you're seeing in content marketing, whether it be around video or social or any other kind of like channels?
Yeah. So I'm coming, from a brand that is financial services, which is very different than other places where you have to really think about like tone and, people don't want to hear jokes made about money necessarily. You have to think about how to approach things in an engaging way, but it's more tonally serious. But what I think is really interesting that I think is a big shift during the pandemic that started to happen is sort of the wall between like personal and professional started to come down a lot. So we all had those Zoom fail moments where in the background somebody pops up behind the camera, you see somebody's kid or dog. That started happening with very senior executives. Like I think there was one on CNBC where somebody's children ran in. You probably have all seen those videos. And I actually think that that type of like break between authenticity and making people like see more behind the curtain of who you really are has changed content aesthetic to be a little bit less formal. So, and that's not to say we produce plenty of content at Make America where we still have folks in suits talking about the markets and very serious topics, but I think there's a little bit more like appetite and attention for content that is a little bit less produced, I would say, and a little bit more like tonally real. And so I think that's one big thing. And then the other thing that's really obvious, but the impact of social platforms like TikTok, Reels, etc. I think what's interesting is I'm seeing a lot of the trends from that video shape video that isn't even in those channels. So if you're on Vox, if you're, wherever you are, you see content that's starting to reflect some of those like more audience-driven approaches. So those are two things that are really been top of mind for me and for my team is like, how do we create stuff that's really going to be audience-driven and engaging and reflecting sort of that a little bit less formal feel, or at least starting to experiment with it.
Right. But at the end of the day, you're also talking about an extremely serious topic, managing people's money.
Right.
So, how do you tackle that? Doing it in an authentic way, doing it perhaps a more lighthearted way than you would have like a decade ago, but you're still talking about a very serious topic.
Yeah.
So how do you approach that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we produce content for a lot of different divisions, as I mentioned before. So one thing that we do, for example, is we produce content that we create that's sort of intended to arm our advisors to share things with their clients. That is probably not the place for a super funny, cat video or GIF or whatever. Like you don't want your advisor sending something where you're cracking jokes. However, we have other areas that are more consumer focused where we're able to kind of play with humor and experiment a little bit more. So it kind of depends on your audience, I think. And the other thing is there are trends like explainers. I know I mentioned Vox before, but explainers, I think it was about 8 to 10 years ago. It's been a while. Those have been out. That's one way to think about, talking about complex topics in a way that's really engaging, like harnessing methods like that you could do for something that could be arming an advisor to talk to their customers, for example. So there's so many trends to sort of choose from in the tool bag right now, which is what makes it really fun to be doing this job. But it doesn't mean you have to jump into all of them either. I think it's figuring out which ones are really relevant to your audiences and going to be valuable versus like chasing trends.
Yeah, earlier today I had a conversation around how do you not allow the shiny object to become a distraction and like focus on things that matter today, which is very challenging, right? Because especially last year where everyone wanted to talk about topics such as NFTs, every CMO, every panel, NFTs, and it probably took away from people talking about so many other things that would have like been so much more practical and pragmatic today. What about your team? Content marketing, I feel like, can come from a variety of different sources. You have a tremendous background and spent time at Google and Meta and so many other prestigious firms in really interesting roles.
Well, thanks.
But in terms of your team and like the makeup of your team and the tools that they possess and how you go about upskilling them, like how do you approach that from a content marketing perspective?
Yeah.
From like a content marketing practice.
I think something that's really interesting to me is there are people who are specialists, and I think for a long time companies sort of hired generalists and grew them into specialists, and I feel like then it shifted a little bit more towards we want someone who's deep in SEO or content marketing or whatever it is. But to me it's not just about the tactical skill set. So for example, for my team, I have a lot of folks who are incredible editorial people who can produce, who can shoot videos, who can write content, et cetera, and that's very important. However, I think another skill you need in a corporation is sort of the ability to get things done in a corporation that's really matrixed and complex, and I think there's different components to that I look for. So I think having real passion for what you're doing and trying to stay top of trends and like being hungry for that is part of what gets you through the day when you're 4 rounds into legal and compliance reviews. And so I think having that like will to win and that passion and that industry expertise is really important. I also think there are sort of certain corporate ninja skills that are really important to all of us, and they can be learned, but they are important almost in any role that you're in. So things like deck making, something that none of us ever want to do, but nothing has ever paid the bills, at least for me personally, more in selling in ideas, like being able to communicate clearly, being able to merchandise what your team is doing. Those things are super important, whether you're in media or wherever you are. And while media buying has science and precision behind it, or content marketing does, some of those corporate skills are really important. So I try and look right now, and whenever I've been hiring in the past few years, for sort of those unicorns who can do a little bit of both and have the specialized skills, but also can really thrive in a corporate environment that makes it sometimes difficult to get things done. So,
yeah, the specialists versus the generalists, especially in the world of advertising and media, is something that we've been challenged with for a long time. Even as it relates to media and investment. Like expecting someone to be programmatic specialists and then like pivot and negotiate and custom sponsorship is always going to be a challenge. Like the need for that specialist, I think, remains.
But I also think you want to find people who are really adaptable. As an example, probably close to 15 years ago now, I was a digital marketer, general digital marketer, and I got through a reorg handed an editorial team. This was at another company. And really wasn't interested in it and had no idea what that even meant. And now it's become something I really love. And since then I've dipped in and out of brand marketing, digital marketing, other areas, and I often tend to come back to social and content because it's something I'm passionate about. But I think you have to have people who are willing to kind of flex and be adaptable, because you just don't know what the needs are going to bring.
Yeah, head on a swivel, as I always say. So going back to your team, how do you motivate, encourage them to embrace innovation? And I guess on a larger scale, I feel like in a couple of panels there was discussion of encouraging test budgets, innovation budgets, which, as everyone likes to say, is always the first thing cut. So again, how do you encourage, motivate, incentivize innovation amongst your team, but also amongst your organization?
Yeah. So I joined Bank of America about 1.5 years ago, and I think I probably instantly sparked that eye roll you get when you have a new boss who asks you to innovate, and you're like, I've been here for 10 years, #innovation, like, I don't want to make anything go viral, don't make me do this, I've tried everything I can. And I think for me, there's a few things I tried to do. So I think first is like, how do you think about creating a sandbox where your team feels like they can play? And there's a lot of different ways to do that. For me, I do find having team offsites where you're in person, which isn't always possible, but I kicked that off when I started. It was incredibly helpful. Like, we brought in really amazing people to come and talk to us and get people inspired. And the other thing I tried to really keep track of is like, I don't need to have all the answers. Like, what is my team's wish list? What are the things that they've been saying for the past 5 years they've wanted to try? They've been wanting to do this quiz or that thing, and really spending the time to talk to them and see what their ideas are, because they're more likely to want to follow through on getting them done if it's things that they've thought of. And also they have amazing ideas that you might not even be considering. So I think trying to inspire the team but really draw from them was important. In terms of how do you get that work done, I went very hard on pilots. So you were talking about test cases or something, right? So for me, I called them pilots. So my goal was, my first year, I wanted to get out the door a bunch. I wasn't worried about things that were going out the door that I didn't love. I was worried about how do we get things going out the door that are great, so that we sort of have a use case for how we want to do more stuff. So we have a handful of things that we did that I'm super proud of, that I really love, that I feel like now anytime we talk with business partner XYZ, and they want to do something, we can say, hey, look at this, test case or pilot, here's what we did, and they're like, aha, we should do more of that. So I think building that roadmap of those innovation pilots for me was really important, drawing from my team and trying to inspire them. And then merchandise and roadshow, and that's an area that content marketers are often not great at, and it's really hard to just carve out the hours in the day to do it, but it's something we try and do a little of and can certainly do more of, so.
Offsites really are so valuable. Just to kind of remove yourself from the day-to-day, be with your team, bringing in outside perspectives, absolutely, doing exercises. I've participated in ones where I remember bringing in someone from improv.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean,
we have ours next week. We almost had an author come, which I thought was so cool. We didn't have time in the schedule, yeah. And it was like a romance novelist, so absolutely nothing to do with Bank of America. And my head of operations was like, Jen, why? Yeah. I was like, it's going to be great. But yeah, I think like inspiration can come from even, outside anywhere. So I love that.
And during like one of the breaks or before this conversation started, talk about being back in the office, getting into the right format, ideal format for your organization. Do you feel like it's gotten better with regards to collaboration? Did you miss out on some of that collaboration when it was 100% virtual?
I think we need to be in the office at this point. I think what's been interesting is that now folks are in many different offices. So, my team, I have folks who, on my team who are in, on the West Coast, folks who are down south, folks who are up north, folks who are in different towns. So I think even though we are all in the office, when we're in different offices, you still end up doing a lot of video. But those in-person moments are just precious to me. Like you can't replace them. To me, it doesn't mean you need them every day, all day, but having a little boost to that is certainly helpful.
Agreed. I really got sick of looking at myself in Zoom as well. So.
Me too.
Yeah, so
it's just tiring.
It is. And there's just no replacing those passing in the hallway conversations. Like, I felt very connected to my immediate team. It was really passing by individuals from like other departments or other groups or other teams that you just happen to run into and you quickly riff on. I mean, that you can't replace on Teams or Zooms or what have you. So it's good to be back. Before we get into Q&A, I always say you can never have enough case studies, honestly. Whether you're at a partner, an agency, a client, just like as a source of inspiration and education. And I asked if you could bring an example of some work. So we have some. So if you can just cue up the slide, and perhaps this will help kind of bring some of these concepts to life. It's
a couple pages, and I hope we can get the link to work on the next one. But so you had asked when we chatted before this, James, you were saying like, what's a good example of something you guys have done at Bank of America? So I love the example of Better Money Habits because it has been around for over 10 years, and I actually used to put Better Money Habits in slide decks when I was pitching content marketing at Amex over a decade ago. So it's been around a while. Keys to success is not treating content marketing and or other marketing like a quarterly campaign and really investing for a long period so you can continue to build on and learn and grow. And I think we've done an amazing job there with Better Money Habits. So Better Money Habits is essentially our financial education center reaching consumers and audiences with financial education. And I say we, but many folks before me have tested and tried so many things. It's sort of, to me, almost like our innovation playground, if you will, to test out and roll out things that we roll across other businesses as well. So if you want to hop to the next page. I hope it's clickable, and I can talk about it in a second, or I'll talk about it, and then we can try and click and see if it works. So we recently did a campaign which was essentially trying to reach young Hispanic adults and folks who typically don't turn to banks for financial advice. And so part of what we tried to do in order to achieve this was really kind of tap into, TikTok-inspired and Reels-inspired aesthetic, which doesn't sound, crazy and edgy maybe to folks not in financial services, but you will find if you go and look around, there's not a ton of content like this that's being done in some of these more serious industries. So we tested a few different things creatively. The first one is sort of these group text chats, and they sort of populate live, and you can see people texting back and forth about financial education. And I've seen other brands doing this, but not in our category. And it was kind of like a fun and engaging way to communicate basic financial advice that seems a little bit more real. The second one I think is probably my favorite. So you've probably seen on Reels, TikTok, etc., people talking to their future selves and giving themselves advice. So we really played with this and did some really ridiculous and silly things that are super campy and kind of funny, and playing with humor a little more than we usually do, which performed super well, and we're definitely going to try and do more of. We also experimented with green screens, so you've seen probably influencers, etc., and this one, I think this was an influencer, but pointing behind them and stuff populating behind their head. It's just a fun way to break down financial education insights. So we tested a lot of these things and got to learn what worked best on Snap, what worked best on Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really fun for us, but I think to me, what's interesting about this quote-unquote case study is like, to me the answer is like long-standing investment and commitment to experimentation over and over and over as audiences continue to want and try and do new things, and really having the voice of the customer and audience at the forefront when you're developing it. So I don't know, Sydney, if you can try, yeah, that one. We'll see how this works. It's super campy, but it was one of my favorites.
Hey, I'm future you, calling to say thanks for starting that emergency fund. Huh? Yep, right after this call, you'll start saving up 6 months of living expenses. How? Look at reoccurring charges to see what you can cancel. Do you really need that second gym membership? What about that meal kit you treat more like a mold kit? Wow, that's really smart. Am I a genius in the future? Don't act so surprised. Knowing what you don't is easy with better money habits. Now get to work. Time is ticking.
So for the record, these are supposed to be campy and cheesy, and we hit the nail on the head. But it was just fun to be able to do something like that, you know, coming from a topic that's a little bit more tonally serious, and start to experiment. So I think what's fun about this is that things are changing so much that by the time we nail something, it's no longer relevant and we have to do something else, and it's what keeps us on our toes. So.
And it's authentic and it's fun. And speaking to consumers, how they really want to be spoken to. Before we open it to the crowd, I'll riff off this. What advice would you have given to your future self?
Ooh, that's a good one.
From a career or marketing perspective, let's just put it down.
From a career perspective, I would say go with the flow and don't try and plan it, which I'm very bad at. I like to plan everything.
Yep.
But I ended up in this field purely by accident. I wish I could say I had a master plan. I mean, I got my MBA, which was totally useless in everything that followed. But I think going with the flow and just, you know, taking on new opportunities even when you're slightly uncomfortable, and then if you like something, go back to it, is probably good advice. So, and then I think, I mean, this is obvious, but for marketing, like, it's all about your customer and your audience and what they want, and I think that's the most important thing to like stay fresh on and tapped into, and all these things are just like widgets and tactics to get there, and they'll always change and they'll always be something different, but as long as that's what you're focused on, you're headed the right way.
Right. So in elementary school, you didn't say I want to be a content marketer?
It said geologist, I think, on my 4th grade profile. I was like, what was that? Yeah.
It's funny, my son does really, 9 years old, wants to become a YouTuber. So that's the career aspiration.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to be a psychologist and study that in college, and I do think it has a pretty good intersection with marketing and getting to people's brains. So.
Absolutely, super applicable. So with that, we'll open up to the crowd. Any questions?
Question. You mentioned earlier about audience-driven content. Where do you get the insights for that audience-driven content? Like,
yeah.
How are you tapping into the audience and knowing what their needs are?
So many things, and it honestly can be exhausting trying to track all of it because there are so many numbers and metrics you can pull. I have some favorites. Social listening can be a really great one. It's kind of time-consuming and manual at times, so I've found it's hard to do for every single thing that you do, but if you do like pulses or have some type of regular cadence, I think that can be great. There have been times in my career where I've really looked into search, less so currently, but at Amex on the B2B side, search trends of what people are searching for. There's so many things, so you just have to kind of pick your data source. I also think audience-driven is about like in some ways chasing those trends and seeing where audiences are headed and going to, though, like thinking about, you know, how they want to consume something, where they want to consume it, how it's changed, and making sure that you're showing up in those places. But I think it can also be like analysis paralysis if you try and tap into 50 different sources for figuring out what your audiences want. So one of the most important things is just picking a few and kind of sticking with them too.
That's great advice.
You know what, I would love to know, so you talk about content marketing being around forever. But in today's world, I feel like the most important thing, or one of the most important things, is the speed in which you can do that to penetrate culture. So, for example, when Ryan Reynolds, over the holidays last year, immediately capitalized on the Peloton controversy around the guy giving his wife a Peloton for Christmas, and then he hired the girl, put it in an ad for him, and all that, and it exploded his business. Like, it went like this. And he did that all in 48 hours. But, you know, big companies, I know, I was at big companies for a long time. That was always the thing that, you know, the most important or the most powerful form of marketing is always word of mouth, penetrating the culture, being in the audience's kind of mindset. How do you, or are you, able to increase the speed in which you're creating content?
So I would say that almost brings me back to like my war room PTSD in some ways, but there's also a lot of brands who are just trying to chase that, and like nobody wants to hear their pop culture insights from, you know, XYZ brand, or you know, it can be harder. So to me, it does depend again on your audiences and your customers. Like, are they coming to you and your brand for that type of thing? Is that really where you should focus, or is having really great evergreen content that's relevant year round more important? And it just comes down to like dollars and kind of hours in the day and what's most valuable. Speed is really hard in a regulated industry, and we've come up with some routines that where certain types of content kind of get prioritized for faster turn reviews, and you can imagine things that Time Warner, like performance and markets and stuff like that, is where we use those bullets, but we can't have every single thing that we produce go out quickly. And if my team were in the audience, they'd be rolling their eyes because it's very hard to get anything out the door quickly. So I think it's about, again, prioritizing, like, where do you want to use that juice with your lawyers, with, you know, and get things out quickly? Is there a certain event that's really important to your company? Is there a certain topic or type of content where you need to be faster, and then maybe other stuff where it's not as important? Because I think you can also burn through a lot of resources trying to do that all the time, and it's really hard. So it's just prioritization. Great question.
Hey, Jen.
Who the heck are you, Robin?
Oh, I don't know. Good to see you.
Robin's at one of our agency partners.
I'm going to ask a question about a topic that obviously gets asked a lot about at events like this around generative AI. You know, obviously publishing companies like ourselves and brands like yourselves are very keen to experiment with it and figure out where in the process that it can play a part and where it can't play a part. And obviously we've seen some organizations make mistakes in that space, and most recently Sports Illustrated allegedly apparently have been using some AI and got into a little bit of trouble with it. But I'm just curious, either from a personal or a professional point of view, whether you can give any thoughts or share any comments on where you think it might be useful in the process.
I can give limited comments on this topic, but I'll try and give as many as I can within the guardrails. And then I'm going to turn it back to Robin to answer, because Robin is super passionate about AI and has looked deeply into this and probably has a much smarter answer than me. But so I would say I'm super intrigued by this space. I do think that one of the things you want to avoid, in my opinion, as a content marketer is parody. And so you have to think carefully about, you know, it's the same thing how everybody tried, you know, when SEO first became a focal point, everyone tried to optimize everything for search, and then you ended up with a lot of content that was very similar across different brand websites. You know, I think you run that same risk. You have to think about things like copyright risk. What does that mean? Producing similar types of content. How do you really differentiate? I do still believe that real differentiation and creativity, et cetera, are going to be really important. So whether or not, you know, the importance of AI is going to depend somewhat on whether or not those things can be achieved uniquely for a brand and who they are. That said, I'm, you know, very interested in this and would love to think more about it, though I can't share any current activities on that note. Robin, do you have any thoughts you want to add?
I think this is the first time I've ever been to an event where a
Why
question
not?
that I've asked has been batted back at me. So I give you 10 out of 10 for that. So, our core business is that we're a publishing company, so, we're obviously extremely keen. I work at Dotdash, by the way, literally just over the other side of the road, West Side Highway. Obviously we're extremely interested in the potential that it's got. And I think the reason that it got on everybody's radar is it's the first time that a piece of technology that I think I've ever seen in my time in marketing has actually delivered on the promise and the expectation of what people said that it could do. So I think that's one of the reasons why we're all sitting up paying attention to it. It does, however, have its limitations. We all understand around the hallucinations that it can suffer from, and I'm sure you've all asked things of it and been given some wonky answers that don't quite make sense. Even when you've asked it to give sources and quote sources, it will give you sources, but it will imagine what a URL might look like because it thinks a piece of content will actually be on that particular website because that's what it knows is on the website. So it will literally make a URL up. So again, just be careful with it. So there's a lot of concern. Plagiarism is obviously an issue. Copyright's obviously an issue. We as an organisation made the decision that we're not going to use AI to create content, but we are increasingly curious about its potential for the way we can integrate it into the business. And so, other ways that we can create editorial assistance to help with some of the heavy lifting on the front end of the process for spotting opportunities around content that we can create for our own brand. So that's something that we're looking at very heavily and working to customize and build our own editorial assistance to sort of help with that process. But right now, I think from a personal point of view, what I've seen, the way that it creates content is it's very it feels like an aggregation, which essentially is what it is, right? It's always going to be backward looking because it's only ever going to reflect what's already been published. And it feels like if you were doing a dissertation on a subject and you were to look at 10 different sources, it's almost like somebody's looked at those sources and then tried to repeat them back, but just change the words a little bit. So it does feel very bland in a lot of respects. Even when you take the time through the prompts to try and train it in terms of tone and voice, things like that, it still comes back as very bland. So, that all said, it's very fascinating, from a personal point of view, to be able to sit and play around with it. And I know somebody asked a question earlier this morning, how many people had experimented with it more than once, and there's only like 1 in 10 hands go up. I do advocate everybody should try it and try it on a daily basis and just fiddle around with it and play with it because it's here to stay and it's only going to get better.
Agreed. And from a content creation standpoint, just even helping with the workflow, sort of free up resources so that your teams can focus more on creating the content, producing amazing journalism, versus some of the things that can be replaced with AI. Any other questions?
Well, thanks for the panel. You showed an example, I think it was TikTok, of the future self. The category has been challenged to navigate social platforms, and in many instances, the brands have made decisions to stay out, financial services brands, in the past. Could you just talk a little bit about how you guys think about navigating those platforms and maybe some progress you're making or learnings navigating?
Unfortunately, I can't. But it's funny, that was the one question that I had noted that. But I think one thing I think about, though, I mean, you can look publicly and see which platforms we are on and aren't on. One way that I've tackled it is thinking about, like, what aesthetics and learnings do we have from those platforms? And then regardless of where you're actually able to be live, I believe you can still tap into them. So if we, never publish a single thing on TikTok and we do a partnership with Bloomberg, I'm making this up, I think we could be tapping into the trends and learnings that are there on Bloomberg. I think we could be doing it on Twitter. I think, so I think, maybe not Twitter, but I think that to me, it's really about like what's resonating with your audiences and how you apply those things, agnostic of where you're actually able to be. I don't know if that helps, but.
Well, I think the case study shows that.
Yeah. So.
Just one thing on the point about trying things out. There's a great site called There's an AI for That.com. You'll find like numerous different AI type
type apps, bots, whatever, that'll help you create photos, videos, all kinds of different content. There's literally an AI for everything. It's called There's an AI for that.com. Try it out, you'll be fascinated.
Any faves that you come across, Babs?
What's that?
Any faves across like that list that you come across?
There's a thing called Pi.ai, which is amazing. It's part of the Inflection company, which is backed by Gates and those types. There's Perplexity, which is, search, the one that's taking on Google search. There's something called AgentBot, which is amazing because the real thing about AI is going to be about agents. And this is numerous, but go to it. You'll be fascinated with all the ones that are in there.
Thank you. One more?
Yeah,
one more.
sorry. Hi. Sort of a different angle. I'm very curious to hear about how your content maybe is expanding beyond marketing, and does your remit or scope, like thinking about customer comms, call center scripts, and just being authentic, like having that voice throughout the customer experience. Can you just talk a little bit about either if your team's overseeing that or how you're thinking about that internally?
Yeah, I think, so there's probably many cases where our content's being used that I'm not even aware of, to be frank, but I think one area is with Better Money Habits. We have set up Better Money Habits champions, and it's in person, and it's folks who give financial education in person to others based on lessons and toolkits and things from Better Money Habits, which has been really successful, particularly with some of the lower income audiences. So that's been exciting. And I mean, I think Bank of America, before I joined, I noticed how much content is woven throughout the ecosystem, whether it's our websites, emails, newsletters, all the stuff that we're doing. And there's probably a lot more we could be doing as well, but it's definitely something that we think about and are interested in. I don't think from a call center perspective, that's a really interesting thought. I'd be curious from your perspective if you guys are doing it.
We can chat.
All right. See, no one in financial services can talk about anything publicly.
I lost the mic, but
We are doing a little bit of voice of the customer exercise because we've noticed a little bit of a gap between particularly like transactional emails with our marketing and just trying to get that content through. But it's like a massive overhaul, frankly, and you're right, like we're at the tip of the iceberg too. So I was curious how you guys were handling it and if that like spanned like content marketing, or is that like more of an ops, like a ops division?
Yeah. We can talk separately, but I've also seen and/or worked for other brands where there's almost no utilization of content, even on the company website, where it's primarily just via paid, and which is such a missed opportunity. So I think sometimes your own newsletters, websites, real estate are some of the best places, and often people are far more engaged when they come from those channels, from what I've seen.
Excellent. Well, this is an area that's constantly changing. I feel like I learned a lot in this panel. I'm going to steal that whole notion of reframing your test and learn as pilots, because I do feel like that's like part of it.
It sounds less scary and cheaper.
Right, and it's a pilot. It's taken off one way or the other, so it's good. Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you, audience, for all the great questions. Thank you, Barry and Meetings.